Hello, welcome to Day 6 Writing. I've got a new story for you this week, but to start with, a little brain teaser. I'd like to unjumble these story characters. They're all characters from traditional stories, and I've put the first letters for you already. Now, the first one, you might remember from last week. Look at the letters in there. Have a go at that. Pause the video while you're doing it, and when you're ready for the answers, just press play again. So, Little Red Hen was our first character there. And here, well, that's the Gib, Dab, Big, the Big Bad Wolf. Well done if you got that one. Again, that looks like little to me. Little Red Riding Hood. Here we have the Gingerbread Man, a little bit trickier with a long word in there. And then finally, it was the Three Little Pigs. Well done for those ones that you got right. If you want to fix any spelling, just pause the video and you can do that now. Let's move on to this week's story. It's called Mr. Wolf's Pancakes. And before I show you the story, I'd like to think about these three questions. What are wolves usually like in stories? What do you think this wolf will be like? Having a look at the picture there to help you. And what predictions do you have for this story? What do you think's going to happen? Three questions there for you to talk about with the person who's helping you. Pause the video while you talk about those questions, and then I'll play you the story.
Mr. Wolf's Pancakes by Jan Fernley, with music by Barry Gibson. Read by me, Nigel Planer. One day, Mr. Wolf was feeling hungry. He fancied some pancakes. Yum, yum, he said, licking his lips at the thought of a big pile of fresh, delicious pancakes. Mr. Wolf had never made pancakes before, so he took his big recipe book down off the shelf and looked inside. But wolves can't read very well, and Mr. Wolf had trouble making sense of it. So he went to get some help from his neighbours. He called on Chicken Licken, who lived nearby. "Please, can you help me read this?" he asked. "No," said Chicken Licken, slamming the door in Mr. Wolf's face. Bang! "Oh dear," sighed Mr. Wolf. He sat down, slowly read the book, and worked out what he needed all by himself. Mr. Wolf looked in his cupboard for the ingredients, but he couldn't find anything he needed. "I'll go to the shop," he decided, and he settled down to write a list. But wolves aren't very good at writing, so Mr. Wolf called on Wee Willie Winkie. "You're very clever," said Mr. Wolf. "Can you help me write my shopping list, please?" "No," said Wee Willie Winkie. "Go away." He slammed his door. Bang. "There's no need to be like that," said Mr. Wolf quietly. Mr. Wolf sat down and tried very hard with his writing until he had made his shopping list all by himself. Now he needed to count his money to make sure he had enough. But wolves aren't very good at counting, so he went to the Gingerbread Man for some help. "Can you help me count my money, please?" he asked politely. "No, I'm too busy to bother with you," said the Gingerbread Man, slamming his door. Bang! So poor Mr. Wolf had to sit down and count his money. It took him a long time, and he had to check it 3 times before it was right. But he did it, all by himself. Mr. Wolf needed a basket to carry his shopping, so he called on Little Red Riding Hood. "Please may I borrow your basket?" he asked very nicely. "I'm not lending my basket to you," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Now clear off." So Mr. Wolf set off to the shop without a basket. "I'll manage," he said. Mr. Wolf went to the shop. He looked at his list, remembered what he needed, counted out his money, and carried the eggs, milk, and flour home, all by himself. Now it was time to make the pancakes. But wolves aren't very good at cooking, so Mr. Wolf called on the 3 little pigs. "Please, can you help me cook my pancakes? I'll share them with you," he said kindly.
"No chance,"
chorused the pigs, slamming their doors. Bang, bang, bang. Mr. Wolf felt sad because nobody wanted to help him. Mr. Wolf went home and started to make the pancakes all by himself. Soon there was a huge pile of delicious pancakes on the table, all ready for eating. Now, as Mr. Wolf had been making his pancakes, a lovely smell had drifted out of the kitchen. All his neighbours could smell it, and it made them feel very hungry. They wanted some pancakes too. They decided to try their luck. So they knocked on Mr. Wolf's door.
"Give us some of your pancakes,"
said the rotten lot. "Why should I give any to you?" said Mr. Wolf. "Not one of you would help me."
"We'll help you eat them,"
replied Mr. Wolf's neighbours nastily.
"Anyway, we're not going away until you give us some."
Mr. Wolf thought very hard for a moment. There was only one decent thing to do. "Oh, very well then," he sighed. "You had better come in." Mr. Wolf opened the door wide and whoosh! His greedy neighbours rudely pushed him aside and dashed down the hall. Mr. Wolf shook his head, shrugged his shoulders, followed them into the kitchen, and when they were all in, Mr. Wolf gobbled them up. Snippety snappety. That was the end of his unhelpful neighbours. Yum, yum, yum. And then, with his bulging tummy not quite full, Mr. Wolf sat down to eat his pile of pancakes. And he did it all by himself. Well, there was nobody else around.
So, how was the story similar to The Little Red Hen? And how was it different? You may have noticed some similarities there, I hope you did, between the two stories. So I'd like you to write something like this. How was the story similar to The Little Red Hen? It was similar because in both stories, and you can talk about that before you write it down, And then how is it different? You might say something like, but Mr. Wolf's Pancakes is different because, and what was the difference in the story there? There were different characters. There was a big difference at the end, wasn't there? Anyway, talk about those two things, how the stories are similar and how they're different, and write down your answers when you're ready. It'd be a good idea to leave this slide up with the sentence starters for you. And I'll see you tomorrow.